the Age of Industrialization. In this topic, we shall learn about Manchester, factories came to India, and the early entrepreneur. Manchester comes to India. In 1772, Henry Patullo, a company official, had ventured to say that the demand for Indian textiles could never reduce, since no other nation produced goods of the same quality. Yet, by the beginning of the 19th century, we see the beginning of a long decline of textile exports from India. In 1811 to 1812, piece goods accounted for 33% of India's export. By 1850s to 1851, it was more than 3%. Why did this happen? What were its implications? As cotton industries developed in England, industrial groups began worrying about imports from other countries. They pressurized the government to impose import duties on cotton textiles so that Manchester goods could sell in Britain without facing any competition from outside. At the same time, industrialists persuaded the East India Company to sell British manufacturers in Indian markets as well. Cotton weavers in India thus faced two problems at the same time. Their export market collapsed and the local market shrank, being glutted with Manchester imports. By the 1860s, weavers faced another problem. They could not get sufficient supply of raw cotton of good quality. By the end of the 19th century, weavers and other craftspeople faced yet another problem. Factories in India began production, flooding the market with machine goods, made impossible to survive weaving industries. Factories come up. The first cotton mill in Bombay came up in 1854 and it went into production 2 years later. By 1862, 4 mills were at work with 94,000 spindles and 2,150 looms. Around the same time, jute mills came up in Bengal, the first being set up in 1855 and another one 7 years later in 1862. In North India, the Elgin mill was started in Kanpur in the 1860s, and a year later, the first cotton mill of Ahmedabad was set up. By 1874, the first spinning and weaving mill of Madras began production. The early entrepreneurs. The history of many business groups goes back to trade with China. The British in India began exporting opium to China and took tea from China to England. Having earned through trade, some of these businessmen had vision of developing industrial enterprises in India. In Bengal, Varkanath Tagore made his fortune in the China trade before he turned to industrial investment, setting up 6 joint stock companies in the 1830s and 1840s. In Bombay, Parsis like Deenshaw, Pettit and Jamsetji Nuzirwanji Tata, who built huge industrial empires in India, accumulated their initial wealth partly from exports to China and partly from raw cotton shipments to England. Seth Hukumchand, a Marwari businessman who set up the first Indian jute mill in Calcutta in 1917, also traded with China. So did the father as well as grandfather of the famous industrialist G.D. Birla. As colonial control over Indian trade tightened, the space within which Indian merchants could function became increasingly limited. Till the First World War, European managing agencies, in fact, controlled a large sector of Indian industries. 3 of the biggest ones were Bird Hylers and Company, Andrew Yulee and Jardine Skinner and Company. These agencies mobilized capital, set up joint stock companies and managed them. Where did the workers came from? In most industrial regions, workers came from the district around. Peasants and artisans who found no work in the village went to the industrial centers in search of work. Over 50% workers in the Bombay cotton industries in 1911 came from the neighboring district of Ratnagiri, while the mills of Kanpur got most of their textile hands from the villages within the district of Kanpur. Over time, as news of employment spread, workers travelled great distances in the hope of work in the mills. Getting jobs was always difficult, even when mills multiplied and the demands for workers increased. The numbers seeking work were always more than the jobs available. Very often, the jobber was an old and trusted worker. He got people from his village, ensured them jobs, helped them settle in the city, and provided them money in times of crisis. That is all in this topic. In the next topic, we will learn about the peculiarities of industrial growth and Swadeshi movement. Till then, enjoy learning.